Well, I'm holding up as best as I can with this horrific news that's taking place in the life of the Jewish people and the state of Israel.
Yeah, yeah. And could you just introduce yourself? I know we're still waiting for some people to join and we might have you do it again, but if you could just introduce yourself and what your organization is and
Certainly. My name is Cantor Michael Zoosman. Cantor is a designation of Jewish clergy ordained at the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York. And I'm a Jewish prison chaplain. I served as the Jewish prison chaplain for all the federal facilities in British Columbia in Canada for 4 years. And I currently serve in hospital and hospice and community settings as a chaplain. And I'm the co-founder of the group L'Chaim, which means to life, Jews Against the Death Penalty. That's a group of about 4,500 plus individuals in Israel and across the world who stand against the death penalty under all circumstances. And we've been very active in making this issue in the forefront in the United States, in Iran, and now in Israel and elsewhere as well. We were very active, particularly in the Tree of Life congregation, the shooter's death penalty sentence there, and opposing that. The co-founder is Abraham Bonowitz, a friend of mine who is the director of Death Penalty Action, and L'Chaim is a project of Death Penalty Action, so we're very closely involved. I could tell you a lot more as well, but I want to give you a chance.
yeah, no, I was just going to say I first came about your name when I was working on yours and Abe's name when I was working on the first nitrogen hypoxia execution that was taking place in Alabama. And I know that Jews Against the Death Penalty and Death Penalty Action both had very strong feelings around that first gassing execution. What was your kind of activism like around that time, and what were your beliefs and opinions and stuff?
We were in very fast gear, doing everything we could to sound the alarm, and rightfully so. The the intergenerational trauma is very real when it comes to state-sponsored killing for the Jewish community in light of the events of the 20th century, particularly the Holocaust. I'm a third-generation Holocaust survivor, as are many within our group. We, perhaps more than anyone, are aware that the death penalty is not the same as the Holocaust. However, for the lessons of that conflagration to be known and to be really learned and understood, they must be internalized. And so when legacies from that event, including lethal injection, which is a direct Nazi legacy, and then gassing to death, come back into the fold, we need to sound an alarm and really leap upon this cultural imperative that we have as Jews to make sure that this never happens again. And so that's why when the nitrogen hypoxia was taking place, a new group called Jews Against Gassing formed, because there was a visceral, gut-wrenching response to the idea that these gassings were taking place. And by the way, as I know we'll be getting to in the future, Ben Gvir and proponents of this bill in Israel have suggested that both euthanasia or gassing could be options as well. Right now it's hanging, but those are not off the table.
Right.
Opening that door leads to any of them, those options available.
Right. And I was just going to say we can talk for an hour about the horrors of the United States capital punishment machinery, but I guess we should move on to the Jewish state, the state of Israel, and what they're trying to pass. Can you tell me a little bit about what this bill is that they're trying to pass, and what it could mean for specifically Palestinian prisoners in Israel and in the West Bank and Gaza?
Certainly. This has been something that Ben Gvir has been, Itamar Ben Gvir has been trying to put into practice since he came into office. This has sort of been his pet project, as it were, just waiting for the right time to make it happen. horrifically, the events of October 7th, 2023, gave him that window. And as politicians have done since time immemorial, they seize upon the zeitgeist, they seize upon the most fragile and of individuals and the sentiments to fulfill their political agenda. And so he saw an opportunity to further his desire to perpetuate vengeance under the guise of deterrence or whatever, what have you, whatever you want to call it. And so he sees an opportunity to has seen an opportunity to push this through the Knesset, to a double standard bill that would target Palestinians. He tried to push through very harshly and explicitly a bill that would target explicitly non-Jewish or non-Israeli Palestinians. That has been attempted to be toned down a bit in recent debates, but the essence of the bill remains that this will inevitably, invariably, without question, target Palestinians in a way that it will not target Jews who live in the state of Israel. And there are two bills currently before the Knesset. The current one, which could be voted on even today or this week, would apply in the West Bank, and a second bill in the future could apply retroactively to all those who are incarcerated in Israel for having perpetuated acts of terror, including October 7th. You're looking at potentially hundreds, if not thousands, of executions.
Yeah, yeah. And, one of the things, thank you for explaining all of that. And one of the things that I found so upsetting about the bill was just that discriminatory aspect when we've seen such an uptick in violence against Palestinians in, for example, the West Bank, in some of the settler communities, and, no arrests made in most of those murders. They almost feel like state sponsored murders by settlers against Palestinians in the West Bank. And yet no mention of those kind of, I guess you could call them terrorists because they're terrorizing Palestinian and Arab communities. There's no mention of anyone like that with regards to this bill.
Yeah, one person who comes to mind is Baruch Goldstein, the Israeli terrorist who engaged in a mass murder of Palestinians years ago. He would not be targeted by this bill, right? And so there's absolutely and unequivocally a double standard, and it's just another way of perpetuating that divide in Israeli society, but doing so in a whole new level of grotesque lethality, for lack of a better phrase.
Yeah. One of the things I loved that you mentioned in one of your blog posts on this topic was about the fact that the Israeli government are really using, or at least the far right members of the Israeli government are really using this cover of war and the chaos of war to kind of railroad this bill through the Knesset. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how, we see in this region of the world this kind of cyclical violence where, there's an attack on one side and then an attack on the other side. Now we're in the midst of, what many would call a genocide on the Palestinian people in Gaza. And then it kind of quietens down for a little bit. How would this law kind of outlast those periods of violence that we see in this region?
This law opens Pandora's box. This law will have a much farther reaching effect than Ben-Gvir, Netanyahu, anybody in Israel or Jews around the world, then we can begin to fathom. Yes, it creates a double standard for Jews and Palestinians now. Depending on who's in power, it will be wielded to their political ends. And anybody who is seen as an opponent could become a victim. We've seen that with Trump in the States, threatening the death penalty on people. And we can see it again in Israel. This is why this is a thin red line, a Rubicon, that Israel is about to cross. And yes, it is under the fog of war, under the cover of war. There were groundswells of protests against this death penalty bill, and it was growing. And then the attack on Iran and relative silence, and now trying to sneak it in insidiously is it's really terrifying to see that this is happening under our eyes, and happening, at this time of year on Passover, when we talk about the angel of death passing over, right? It's passing over Israel now, and the consequences are truly awful, and are beyond what we can begin to consider.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And just to touch on who you mentioned, Ben Gvir, this far right, um, outwardly racist, if I may say so, member of parliament in Israel. And you touched on this, that he's kind of been working towards this for a long time. I mean, I remember a clip of him in a prison in Israel, standing over Palestinians on the ground, talking about, boasting about the maltreatment of these prisoners, and talking about how the death penalty would be next for them. And Ben Gvir has spoken a lot about how he wants the deportation, even, of anyone who he deems to be a political opponent to the state of Israel, even members of Israel's own parliament. It's not hard to imagine that this could be weaponized against anyone. So I appreciate you explaining that, and it's very scary.
Yes, indeed. It is terrifying, and I'm not exaggerating in using those words. It's terrifying, and to see the fact that people, well, perhaps we'll get into this about the dehumanization of the other, but what excuses people use to justify their support of this is just as terrifying
Yeah.
as the bill itself.
Yeah, no, for sure. In recent years, we've seen such an increase in that dehumanizing language with regards to Palestinians. And of course, that was furthered by October 7th, and the tragic attack that happened there. And, I don't think that this bill would have got the support that it has got if October 7th had never happened. I think also a lot of people were very angry about the prisoner swap that took
Mhm.
place, that freed the orchestrator of October 7th. And that's, one of the reasons that they claim to want to do this, which is to take away that bargaining chip with regards to exchanging prisoners. Another thing that they often note for the reason for a law like this is deterrence, to deter people. The idea that someone might be sitting at home thinking, maybe I should attack, and then, oh no, there's the death penalty, might be a reason for them not to do it. From what you know, with your death penalty action and activism work that you've done, is deterrence an effect of the death penalty? Can we trust the death penalty to deter violent crimes and violent attacks?
Let there be no doubt. Deterrence is a delusion. There are countless meta studies done over the past 40, 50 years that markedly conclude that there is no connection between deterrence and the death penalty. On the contrary, there is evidence that the death penalty, through what academic and scholars have called the brutalization effect, can actually increase a likelihood of murders. This has been documented in the States. I refer people to the excellent work of Death Penalty Project with Robert Denham, and also the Death Penalty Information Center. All you have to do is Google Death Penalty Information Center deterrence, and you'll get a whole bunch of research that determines this. So the question becomes, well, why? Why do people buy into this? Why do people buy into this deterrence delusion? And it's a way to similar way to justify the understandable desire for revenge, which None of us who haven't lost a loved one directly to, God forbid, to murder, to brutality, to terror, none of us can put ourselves in the position of those who have. And I mean, none of us in L'chaim who can begin to put ourselves in the position of the victims or family members of October 7th, nor should we. We have a responsibility as a society to uphold the very basic standards that we've set forth to keep us civil, to keep us as a civilization. Elie Wiesel famously said, death should never, of the capital punishment, he said, death should never be the answer in a civilized society. We have a responsibility to those victims and family members to support them while also helping them to not give in to those basic urges. And I say this as someone who myself used to support the death penalty growing up as a third generation Holocaust survivor who would have wanted it for the people who victimized my family, my grandmother, and over time, as becoming a prison chaplain, realizing that this, for various reasons, this was entirely the wrong way to be thinking. And deterrence is just one of those illusions that we put forth to try to justify supporting those base yet understandable feelings and desire for revenge.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And it kind of also creates this like cyclical revenge where one side is taking revenge on the other and this side is.
Yes, yes. So to speak to that, when you mentioned the bill, it also blinds people. Forgive me for using that verb, but it prevents people from seeing the reality that by putting to death the perpetrators of October 7th or other perpetrators of terror, it will only increase the number of shaheeds, of martyrs, people who want to avenge the other. There's a famous quote, Elias Levi, who said, anybody on the gallows, or the head of anybody on the gallows becomes that of a martyr. No matter who they are, they will become a martyr for somebody else. Violence begets violence, and that cycle needs to be stopped.
Right. Right. And, I know we spoke about this a little bit before, but I grew up in a community that was that Israel could do no wrong in their eyes and stuff. And one of the arguments that they often put forth was, Israel values life, Israel cares about life. But what we've seen in the past year is that a complete disregard for human life, as long as they're not Israeli or Jewish lives. And so it's that double standard that we spoke about before.
Yes, I hear what you're saying, and I tend to agree, and I think it's born out of, I wouldn't I guess I wouldn't call it a complete disregard for life. I believe it's again similar to the deterrence delusion, a, a, a disillusion or a justification that is false,
Mm.
that implicitly values a Jewish life over a non-Jewish life. And that's born out of a tradition that, for understandable reasons, has had to protect itself from enemies for
Right.
centuries, for millennia. I mean, the Jewish tradition, we've been persecuted ad nauseum. It's why, I respect people of all political views, of all, we're allowed to agree to disagree. I identify as a progressive Zionist. I do believe that Israel needs to exist, but because partly of all this persecution that's taken place, but it can't. The pendulum can't swing to the other side where we become the persecutors in
Mm.
order to hold a line that
Right.
we're creating in our minds.
Right.
So um, it's crucial that we hold everyone to the same standards, and that we understand that, yes, Israel intended to be life affirming, and it's built upon a Jewish tradition that is life affirming, both in law and spirit of the law. And so once we we let go of that, we are in trouble.
Mm. No, for sure. Going, back to some of the discriminatory aspects of the bill, one of the things that really scared me about this bill was this rush 90-day timeline from sentencing to execution. And of course, the lack of any kind of appeals or opportunities for clemency or commentation or mercy of any sort once being handed this death sentence. Is that particularly scary in a country that, that's legal system doesn't necessarily treat two humans the exact same with regards to Palestinians and Jews?
It's absolutely untenable. And we don't have to look far to see how it plays out in the United States, right? The legacy and the ongoing racism of that exists in the application of the death penalty is very real. So individuals who are the accused, individuals who have white victims, are much more likely to get the death penalty than individuals with victims of color. And the statistics bear that out. And so it would be a similar application of this uneven standard in Israel. And as well, regarding what you said about the rush to execute, what that also causes, we're currently seeing a rush to execute in the state of Florida, where last year there were upwards of 20, maybe 19 executions, one about every 2 weeks. That's the intention of the current governor, to have an execution every 2 weeks. Well, the next one, which is scheduled for tomorrow, is of James Duckett, who has an innocence claim that currently is before the courts, and he was given a DNA test that was ruled inconclusive and in need. State officials said it was inconclusive and needs to be tested more. And yet the state is still rushing to execute him tomorrow. So when we see the proof of this, and he very well might be executed tomorrow, and it's happened before. There are a list of people who have been innocent and executed. It will happen in Israel. And in fact, it's happened in Israel. Mayor Tobiansky was a captain, I believe, in the IDF. And in 1948, he was accused falsely of treason and executed and posthumously exonerated. The country has done it before. A bill that rushes this through will guarantee that it will happen again. And people who use Jewish law to justify this need only to look to those same Gedolim, those same great prosecutors of Jewish law, the Rambam, Maimonides. Rabbi Moses ben Maimon lived in the 12th century. He famously said that it is better to release 1,000 guilty individuals than to put one guilty person to death. So what's happening in Israel now is the exact opposite.
Yeah. No, and that's such a conversation to be had as well. Israel is the only Jewish state, and therefore is expected to somewhat represent Jewish values. Can you talk a little bit about what Jewish law and what Jewish culture and value would say about this death penalty law, and maybe even this wider situation that we find ourselves in of violence in Gaza, the West Bank, and in Israel itself?
Certainly. Well, let me preface it by saying, two Jews, three opinions, and there's an old joke that says a Jewish man person trapped on an island, right? You may have heard this one, and they finally rescue him, and they say he's built 2 synagogues on the island. And one of them, he says, this is the one I go to all the time. And they said, well, what about this other one? He says, well, that one I would never step foot in. So
that pretty much sums it up for sure.
Yeah, we our Talmudic tradition, teku, is the phrase that rabbis would use when they would say, okay, we'll agree to disagree. This is an argument Shem Hashamayim, an argument for the sake of heaven. We're going to
Right.
have different opinions on this.
Right.
So it depends on who you ask. But my belief, and I will add the belief of many of my rabbinical colleagues across denominations, um, will say that Judaism is intended to be a life-affirming religion, tradition, culture, what have you. That Judaism is life-affirming. Hence our name, L'chaim, right, to life.
Right.
Not lamavet, not to death, but to life. Now, granted, okay, it's never so simple, right? What does that mean? How do you further life? But when in doubt, Jewish tradition errs on the side of life. And so what that means is, without getting lost in all the details, from the biblical core, right, which very much had the death penalty. There were like 30 different biblical offenses that would cause death, including, insulting your parents. So I'd have been executed long ago for that.
Me too.
Perhaps you as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
So those were intended to be mitigated by rabbinic commentary over the centuries, and they were. So you had stoning, you had burning to death, you had decapitation, strangulation. All of these things were, they were made more palatable, right? Which we're seeing in Israel now. And even eye for an eye, lex talionis, which is quoted by so many as, oh, you're Jewish, you should believe in eye for an eye. Well, eye for an eye was, first of all, intended as the financial compensation of what the value of one eye for another. And it was meant to truncate the vengeful passion that we have to want to destroy everybody in revenge and just winnow it down to one person. So that's the trajectory from the base instinct for revenge. The rabbis are trying to cut it back, cut it back, cut it back, cut it back, putting up prodigious safeguards to make it virtually impossible to execute anyone. You had to put someone to death, there had to be two witnesses to the crime, and those witnesses had to tell the person in the act, wait, before you do that, what you're about to do will give you the death penalty. I just want to make sure you know that. Now you can proceed. So that's the standard. That's
very,
the standard.
very high bar. Yeah.
Right. And that's the trajectory of from there to, and the tradition says, if there were an execution in 70 years, it would be a hanging court. One rabbi says if it were an execution in 7 years, another says if we were on the court, there would never have been an execution. There were still people who dissented, who justified it by saying, well, if you think that, you're going to increase murderers in Israel based on their false belief of deterrence. And we can forgive them for having that belief of deterrence 2,000 years ago, when they didn't have social science and these studies to demonstrate that it's a fallacy. For someone to declare it today is insanity.
Yeah. And one could argue that there's so many ways to deter, many of these attacks by, for example, not poking the bear through the years, shooting at unarmed protesters, taking down whole villages of Palestinian communities and giving it to Jewish settlers. If we want to talk about deterrence, there are deterrence policies that could have been at play for a very long time while, Israel was consistently attacking Palestinians in Gaza, the West Bank, and in Israel as well. And just on your point about Jewish values around life and the sanctity of life, I always remember, I don't know who said it, or if it's just in the Torah, but it's that idea of every life a universe, that to take one life is to destroy an entire universe. And I can't help but think that of, each universe that has been destroyed in the past year, 2 years, 3 years, since October 7th. I can't even remember which year it was now, 2023, right?
Yeah.
3 years almost.
Whoever destroys a life, it is considered as if he destroyed an entire world. And whoever saves a life, it is considered as if he saved an entire world. That's from the Talmud, Sanhedrin, chapter 4, verse 5.
Right. And I think it's a beautiful sentiment because it's, you can take it in its literal sense, which is, this entire web of a story and human life and human connections that exists around each person. And that is the case for the victims of October 7th, and also the case for all of the tens of thousands of Palestinian lives that we've lost since. So, yeah.
And when we don't do that, that's when we get the double standard that you mentioned before. That's when we get the dehumanization of the other.
Mm,
And I have seen it time and time again as what justifies any sorts of um, awful behavior, wanting the individual to suffer.
mm,
The death penalty is always torture, whether it's physical, which usually it is,
mm,
or psychological, which always it is. We correspond with individuals, Jewish and non, in line for execution regularly, and
mm.
they are all going through psychological torture, knowing their date of death, right, and counting down the days. People don't care if they don't feel the person is human.
Mm.
So to dehumanize somebody, make them less than a life, is the only way that they can allow for actions that are violating human rights to take place.
Right. Yeah, no, it's so true. And we see so much of the language, I think you touched on this before, that was used to dehumanize Jewish people during the Holocaust and during the Second World War, now being used against Palestinians writ large. And it's really scary.
Yeah, that they're dogs, that
Vermin.
yeah,
Yeah.
less than, and therefore all bets are off. And you
Right.
can claim, so it allows somebody who claims to support human rights to say, well, they're not really human.
Hmm.
That's the
And
implication. They may not come out and say that,
right.
but that's what's under the surface.
Right. Which is, why we see a lot of very liberal, quote unquote, Jewish people in America who are, blindly supporting the current policies of the Israeli government and the actions that they're doing. And I think a lot of that comes from this, like you said, innate fear, trauma, kind of fight or flight that kicks in when
Yeah.
Jewish lives feel at risk. And we have seen a rise in anti-Semitism. And I wanted to ask you, with this new death penalty bill, if it gets passed, and I believe you had mentioned that it was either going to be going for a final vote today or tomorrow. Do you foresee that it could have ripple effects around the world with regards to anti-Semitism and the belief around Judaism and Jewish people?
People already who are anti-Semitic will will say that Judaism is a death cult already. This will be like giving them, a piece of cake.
Hmm.
They're gonna run victory laps, and this claim of Judaism as a death cult is going to go viral,
Hmm.
and it will endanger Jews everywhere. I know that that's a controversial statement to make, but I truly believe it. I saw it when, during what was taking place in Gaza. There was the uptick in anti-Semitic rhetoric in my own community, even out here in Canada, and back when I was living in DC. It will only make matters worse, and it's a further manifestation and effect of what you were mentioning before, which is this might makes right mentality,
Hmm.
which might makes wrong. I
Hmm.
mean, it's just digging deeper and deeper, and the zeitgeist that Trump and Netanyahu are capitalizing on, that by force we can do whatever we want. That's also what this bill is about, is just saying, okay, we're going to do everything by force. We're going to kill you,
Right.
and that will stop everything. That'll make everything better.
Right.
It never has worked that way. It will make matters in exponentially worse.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I completely agree wholeheartedly. I guess to finish off, I would love to ask, what do you expect with this bill with regards to when it might go for that final vote, and what that means in terms of it being put into action and stuff?
Well, I was told by my colleagues in Israel who are working with Knesset that it could happen as early as this week. It could
Mm.
even happen today. Um, And I'm a chaplain, right? I work at the in the liminal line of life and death all the time, and you can sort of learn to see synchronicities there, what Jung would call synchronicities, things connecting in ways that we don't expect. And here we are, right, at the precipice of Passover. I already mentioned the angel of death, which, by the way, Elie Wiesel, he actually referred to the death penalty as the angel of death. I'll just
Hmm.
quote him very quickly. He says,
Yes.
"With every cell of my being and with every fiber of my memory, I oppose the death penalty in all forms. I do not believe any civilized society should be at the service of death. I don't think it's human to become an agent of the angel of death,"
Hmm.
which is why we have named our holiday Passover, to stop the angel of death from coming to us. And tomorrow is the fast of the firstborn. I'm a firstborn child, and we fast so that we can stop the angel of death. And this could potentially be the day when Israel votes in this man-made angel of death. So to answer your question, it could happen very soon. And given what you rightfully said about the expedited nature of this, it will be, I foresee it being implemented very soon. The Israel Prison Service has already started constructing gallows.
Oh,
By the way, those another factor on the list of many factors, which we don't have time to get into, but against the death penalty is the trauma that it will cause the executioners,
mhm.
those who are involved in the hanging process or whatever the means are. So those are already set up. I foresee it happening very quickly, and it's, as always, a political tool.
Mm.
So Ben Gvir, if he gets this through, he's going to celebrate it, and he's going to want to maximize its use.
Yeah, yeah. And you brought up Elie Wiesel, who is an icon in Jewish history, and a survivor, and went through the darkest of periods of Jewish history. And for Ellie to come out with that belief, and no sense of revenge, or seeing through the kind of almost fraudulent smokescreen that revenge would somehow right the wrongs that Elie Wiesel experienced during the Holocaust, I think is such a beautiful testament to the strength of, not leaning into those very human tendencies to seek revenge and violence when being wronged.
Yes, he was an ardent uh, abolitionist for the death penalty throughout his life, and one of the final statements he made on it, not long before he died, was, "In my home state of Connecticut, there was a brutal murder." He was speaking at Wesleyan University, and he said to he was asked what his thoughts were on the death penalty for the perpetrators, and he was speaking to the television cameras as if he were going to speak to the family, and he said, "I know how you feel, but death is not the answer." And that's when he made his famous comment, "Death should never be the answer in a civilized society." And so I stand by it. I know there are people who will say, "Oh, how can you know what he would think now? You don't know." Okay, granted, I can't claim to know exactly what he would say, but based on the legacy that he's left us,
Right.
I have no doubt in my mind that he would vehemently disapprove and vote no against this bill.
Right. Yeah. No, I can't see a world in which he would come out in support of it. And I just want to thank you so much for all the work that you do, not just in terms of educating people about the death penalty and about the wrongs of the death penalty, but also for the Jewish people in allowing a voice to come through that is in alignment with what I believe, which is the sanctity of life, and that never again means for anybody, not for Palestinians, not for Jews, and as a persecuted people, I think it's so important to have voices like yours that speak up for other persecuted groups of people. So thank you so much, Cantor Zoosman. I really, really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Gabby, for allowing me this wonderful platform, and I wish you and your family a very happy Passover.
Happy Passover. Thank you so much. Take care.
You too. Bye bye.